Have you ever wondered if Dracula was real? Not the cape-wearing vampire from movies and legends, but the flesh-and-blood man who actually inspired one of the most terrifying characters in history. Today we're uncovering the dark and brutal story of Vlad the Impaler, a ruler so feared that his enemies literally believed he was a monster. This is the real story behind Dracula.
So really think about it. Was there an actual person behind the myth? Because as you'll see, the historical reality is actually way more intense and maybe even scarier than anything you've ever seen on the big screen. There's this massive divide between the fiction we all know and the history that actually happened. The fictional vampire, right? He drinks blood, he has all these supernatural powers, and he's usually defeated by folk remedies like garlic or a wooden stake. But the historical warlord, well, he didn't need magic. He relied on cutting-edge psychological warfare, viewing himself as a national defender who ruled his domain through absolute unfiltered fear. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the man behind the myth. To really understand this guy, we first have to understand the incredibly dangerous world he grew up in. In the year 1431, a boy named Vlad was born in Transylvania. Yep, a very real region in modern-day Romania. At that time, Europe was just chaotic. Kingdoms were constantly fighting for power, and the mighty Ottoman Empire was aggressively expanding across the continent. And if you look at this timeline, his childhood shatters almost immediately. By 1442, he's taken as a hostage by the Ottomans. By 1447, his family is brutally murdered. And by 1448, he gets his very first, incredibly violent taste of ruling. Moving on to Section 2, Son of the Dragon. So where does that famous name actually come from? Well, Dracula basically translates to dragon. You see, Vlad's father was sworn into a highly secretive military group called the Order of the Dragon, which was set up to protect Christian Europe. Because of this, his family became known as Dracula, so Vlad naturally became known as Dracula, which quite literally translates to Son of the Dragon. But getting back to his youth, it was far from peaceful. It was actually forged in captivity. When Vlad was still just a kid, he and his younger brother were taken hostage by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans basically did this to guarantee his father's loyalty back home. It was a pretty common yet totally brutal political move back then, holding royal kids miles away from their families. You can imagine the psychological impact of being a captive completely changed Vlad forever. Many historians believe these years really forged his worldview. He was witnessing extreme violence and executions at an age when most kids should just be playing. But he was also being educated by some of the absolute best minds in Ottoman military tactics. So he developed this deep, burning hatred for his captors while simultaneously learning the terrifying power of psychological warfare directly from them. That takes us to Section 3, ruling through absolute fear. Eventually, Vlad returned to his homeland, but everything had changed. His father and older brother had been assassinated, and his family's power was destroyed. Consumed by anger and an intense desire for revenge, he fought his way back to the Wallachian throne. And his whole philosophy became power made visible. He truly believed that absolute fear was the single strongest weapon a ruler could possess. So he punished thieves, traitors, and invaders with extreme, calculated cruelty. His favorite method? Impalement. Victims were placed on large wooden stakes and left to die slowly. It became so terrifyingly common that he earned the nickname we all know today, Vlad the Impaler. He didn't just use this on criminals, though. He applied this fear as a brilliant military strategy. Vlad usually commanded a vastly outnumbered force, sometimes just 22,000 men facing down a massive Ottoman army of up to 90,000. To survive, he used asymmetrical warfare. Step 1, scorched earth. He literally burned his own crops and poisoned his own wells with animal carcasses so the invading armies would starve. Step 2, relentless hit-and-run guerrilla attacks to exhaust the enemy. And Step 3, psychological terror. He would use mass impalement to completely break an enemy's will to fight before a single sword was even swung. Section 4, Forest of the Impaled. Okay, picture this. It's June 17, 1462. The mighty Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, the guy who literally conquered Constantinople, is marching on the Wallachian capital. Vlad knows there's no way he can win a pitched battle. So, what does he do? He launches this incredibly daring raid known as the Night Attack. He actually dresses his men in Ottoman disguises, sneaks into the enemy camp in the dead of night, and tries to assassinate the Sultan right in his own tent just to plunge the massive army into absolute chaos. Now, he misses the Sultan, but he causes massive casualties. Honestly, though, it's what the Sultan's army found the very next day as they approached the capital that really stopped him in their tracks. 20,000. Let that number sink in. That is the staggering, horrifying number of impaled victims, enemy soldiers, criminals, and traitors, that Vlad had left rotting on tall wooden stakes right outside the city as a warning. According to historical accounts from the time, and I quote, "When the Turkish army approached, they found a field covered with stakes, a spectacle so horrific that even hardened warriors turned pale." Think about that. Sultan Mehmed himself stared at this forest of the impaled, realized he was fighting a man willing to go to such unimaginable extremes, and actually ordered his massive army to turn around and march home. The psychological warfare worked.
And finally, Section 5, Hero, Villain, and Legend.
Because of all this, Vlad's historical legacy is incredibly polarizing. On one side, to Western Europe and the Ottomans, he was this bloodthirsty monster, a sadistic tyrant who just delighted in torture. But if you look at how he was viewed in his homeland of Wallachia, he is often seen as a patriotic hero. To them, he was a strict defender of the nation who fought off foreign invasions and maintained order during a wildly chaotic time. So was he a ruthless monster, or a leader doing whatever was necessary to protect his people? Historians are still debating that today. But how exactly did this controversial warlord become the supernatural vampire we know today? Well, in 1476, Vlad actually dies in battle, and soon after, thanks to the newly invented printing press, highly exaggerated stories of his cruelty just spread like wildfire across Europe. Over time, the local translation of Dracula actually shifted from dragon to devil. Fast forward centuries later to 1897, an Irish author named Bram Stoker stumbles across the name Dracula, learns it meant devil in Wallachian dialects, and borrows that chilling moniker for his fictional vampire count. So the truth is, Vlad the Impaler definitely did not drink blood, and he couldn't transform into a bat. But his real-life actions as a warrior and a ruler, they were absolutely terrifying enough to create a legend that has survived for over 500 years. He remains one of the most feared, controversial, and deeply fascinating figures of the Middle Ages. Vlad Dracula, the real man behind the myth.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. When you really look at the facts, which is scarier, the fictional monster or the historical man? If you enjoyed this explainer and want to uncover more deep dives into dark historical legends, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, remember, sometimes the real stories are far more terrifying than the legends.